Mr. Castro and the others are charged with additional crimes as well, including destruction of aircraft and 4 individual counts of murder. The indictment was returned by a grand jury sitting in this district in Miami on April 23rd, 2026, and was unsealed today. For nearly 30 years, the families of 4 murdered Americans have waited for justice.
A historic moment for the Cuban people tonight. Former Cuban leader Raul Castro has been indicted on several charges for his alleged role in the 1996 shootdown of 2 Brothers to the Rescue planes.
And earlier today at Miami's historic Freedom Tower, federal officials announced the charges against Castro. Our live team coverage continues now. NBC6's Lorena Inclán is standing by.
But first, let's get to NBC6's Valerie Ryan with the latest on the indictment. Valerie.
Well, Joanne, Jackie, in the last few hours, there's been a lot of moving parts. But like you mentioned earlier today here at the Miami Freedom Tower, the families of the 4 men who were killed in that tragedy were present when the FBI and the Department of Justice announced the charges against Raul Castro and 5 co-defendants. Now, those charges are conspiracy to kill U.S. nationals, 2 counts of destruction of an aircraft, and 4 counts of murder. Now, again, the charges stem from the 1996 tragedy that killed 4 Americans when 2 civilian planes operated by Brothers to the Rescue were shot down over the Florida Straits. The Miami-based humanitarian group was known for searching for Cuban rafters during the migrant crisis of the 1990s. Now, Raul Castro, now 94 years old, was leading Cuba's armed forces at the time. The indictment accuses him of ordering the shootdown. Now, officials say the case has been decades in the making. According to officials, a South Florida grand jury returned the indictment on April 23rd, setting the stage for today's announcement. Prosecutors say they will seek the maximum penalties possible, including life in prison and/or the death penalty on the murder counts. For many in South Florida, especially the Cuban exile community, today marks a long-awaited step towards justice.
Standing here in the Freedom Tower gives this moment added meaning. This is the Ellis Island for Cuban refugees. It was the main processing center for countless exiles who fled communist Cuba with the hopes of reaching the American dream. For 30 years, the families have waited. The Miami community has waited, and our country has waited. Today is a step towards accountability. This is the first time in almost 70 years that a senior leadership of the Cuban regime has been charged in the United States for acts of violence, resulting in the death of Americans.
Now, the question now is what happens next. Now, the U.S. Attorney General says he hopes that Raul Castro will voluntarily come to the U.S. to face these charges now that there is a warrant out for his arrest, but did not specify what the U.S. may possibly do if that is not the case. Again, this is still a developing story. We'll continue to keep you updated. That's the latest here from downtown Miami. Valerie Ryan, sending it back to you guys.
Thanks, Valerie. And our team coverage continues with NBC6's Lorena Inclán, where over in Little Havana, the heart of the Cuban exile community, people gathered to discuss today's historic indictment.
And Lorena, you've been speaking with Cuban Americans about today's news. What are they saying?
There's a lot of hope and excitement, and people are happy with the news that came out today. Since I joined you last an hour ago, you can see a lot more people have gathered here today. You're going to see a lot of smiles, a lot of laughter, people calling this the first step towards a possible free Cuba in the future. You could see people with their flags here, and also the cars driving by have been honking in support, and you see people throwing up their hands in the signs of an L for Libertad or liberty. This is a very personal story, a very personal case. The 4 men who died that day 30 years ago are known by some of the people here. I've spoken with people who knew their families and know their families personally, including one man who's very known in the Cuban exile community who I spoke with. He says one of the men who died was a member of his group, democracy movement. Take a listen to what he had to say.
Listen, even if it doesn't get to that point because he's already too old and because he's going to hide under a rock now, the fact that from now on he is a fugitive, he cannot be exposing, be exposed in concentrations and traveling abroad and so forth, neutralizes a lot of his powers inside Cuba. So that's a punishment on its own for a dictator that only thinks of power.
But we always knew that Raul was the one that said the go, okay? So like I said, we've been waiting, and we're still waiting for something good to come out of Cuba. And, very good work, and let's hope that they keep on with this and not let it go.
Now, in many ways, the people here tell me that today's news only confirmed what the Cuban exile community has already known all along. And I asked some of them what would it mean to them to see Raul Castro here in Miami facing justice in a U.S. courtroom. Many of them stunned at that question because many couldn't even fathom that that could even be a possibility. But now they're beginning to hope not only for that, to see that one day, but also for what they all want, which is a free Cuba. Back to you in the studio.
Lorena, thanks for that. Well, after the indictment was announced, I spoke with NBC6 political reporter and analyst Alex Pinellas about how the Maduro arrest in early January helped to lead to this moment.
Nicolas Maduro was extradited to this country to face charges here. I think a lot of people in South Florida had very high expectations because that happened in Venezuela. And as you mentioned, it's a very difficult and different situation in Cuba.
And the expectations have only gotten larger as a result of what happened with this indictment. And it's been building, right? We learned about the secret negotiations that took place for several months, including the grandson of Raul Castro. We saw the visit of the CIA director to Cuba, who delivered a very stern warning from the president. We saw the imposition of additional sanctions, and now this indictment. So the pressure has been building, and so have the expectations, especially by Cuban Americans here in South Florida, that something significant is going to happen. And I think for many, especially for older Cubans who have been here for many generations, a Delcy Rodriguez type of solution may not work for them.
Stay with NBC6 for continuing coverage on Cuba. Coming up in the next half hour, investigator Amy Viteri will take a closer look at what evidence came out in the indictment and why the Department of Justice is only now pursuing charges.